Welcome to Spiritual Naturalism Today, a conversation on science, nature, and spirituality. Our program is sponsored by the Spiritual Naturalist Society with host Daniel Strain.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. Suppose you're walking along in the park and you come upon a group of people in a circle, maybe in a meditative seated position, and they're chanting. Now, you wouldn't normally think these are naturalists, but they could be. That's what we'll be talking about today. Our topic today is ritual that works. And specifically, we're talking about ritual that is meaningful and useful to naturalists. Now, I have with me today my co-hosts Lee Anderson, Jay Forrest, and B.T. Newberg. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
And I'm Daniel Strain. And that's what we're talking about today. Ritual that works. Ritual for naturalists. And we're just going to have a general conversation about it. My thoughts are that I have found ritual to be very useful in my life, and I've started even some new rituals lately that I'm anxious to talk about with everybody. But what do you guys think?
Well, I think the first thing we should probably ask, what is ritual?
Yeah, ritual as opposed to habit.
Right.
Yeah, are we talking about brushing our teeth, or what are we doing here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can say what I feel. We don't have any dogma as spiritual naturalists, as you know, but if I were to share my thoughts on it, I would say that a ritual is something that you do, that you perform. It can be a brief little thing, or it can be a protracted event. It can be a solitary thing, or it can be a communal ritual. But these acting out of something or another, it has behind it the purpose of helping to cultivate things in yourself, helping to form yourself, form your character, form your habits, form ways of thinking, ways of being, your personality, whatever you're trying to work on in yourself. And rituals can be a way to remind you of certain principles or ideas, or to help you focus on certain things, or to clear your mind. And so there's a whole bunch of different reasons. But that's generally kind of what I think of when I think of ritual.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I would say that fits the spiritual exercises, but I think ritual, to me at least, is a little more specific. Ritual is something. Start with some examples. Like you could, when you go to a temple, or go to a church, or go to a mosque. That's ritual for people of those religions. If you do a little prayer, or for some people, walk through the park and just touching a tree and saying hello to the tree in their mind can be a ritual. And I think what really makes those things different than other forms of self-cultivation is they're set apart. There's a sense of the sacred in the sacred meaning set apart from normal kind of mundane activity. There's a sense of specialness about it, and there's a beginning and an end to it. So it's kind of like a special set apart time to intentionally do this thing that's typically a repeated action and has this kind of mystique about it.
Yeah, I think that if you look at why do ritual, for me, if you incorporate ritual into your life, not only does it have these kind of practical purposes behind it that I mentioned before, but it does introduce a sense of the sacred into your life. I totally agree with that, and a sense of the sacred it colors your life in a way. It demarcates that we're more than just Walmart shoppers living our life in this modern world, managing our resources, trying to get more money, trying to do this or that. It adds a touch of a sense of flavor that denotes that your life is about something that's deeply meaningful and full of value and purpose and meaning.
So is there kind of like a broad idea of ritual and then more of a specific? Because when you think of ritual, for an example, just in psychology, if you're suffering from OCD, for an example, there's people that they do repetitive actions and they do it for a reason. And that's kind of the condensed version of ritual. It's repeated action for a purpose. And for them, the purpose is to try to take control of their life. There's things that they can't control. And if you're OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, you want to control everything in your life. And so they do rituals that actually may not have any effect, but it gives them the feeling that they're in control of their life. And so there's this broad thing called ritual. And then there's more of, from a naturalistic viewpoint, where we look at ritual that works, is the name of it, that it actually accomplishes something. So I think that, there's people that do rituals, but do they actually work? They may make them feel better, but that does actually improve their life. So I think if we take it from a spiritual naturalist viewpoint, we're looking for rituals that work to produce some spiritual benefit. Would that be a good way to put it?
I think that I would agree with that. Sure. What do y'all think?
Yeah. Well, what do you guys get out of it? When and if you do ritual, what do you experience? What do you get out of it?
Well, I really like what Jay said about comparing it to OCD, because I've always found that a fascinating comparison. I do think there is kind of an OCD-like quality to ritual. Like you said, BT, it's got this repetitive. And I also know many cases in my own life and other people that I've heard from where you try to do the ritual thing, or you go and you attend a ritual thing. Say, for me, it was the Unitarian Church. Now, Unitarian Church is a wonderful organization, and they have a lot of people that really relate to what they're doing there. For me, I went in and I saw their ritual that they were doing, and it didn't connect. It felt kind of empty to me. It felt like empty theater. It was like, why are they going through all this stuff? That was before I'd kind of gotten into some other things that taught me more about ritual. But
and at that point, it might have looked out from the outside like OCD to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the thing about OCD is that for people who really do have OCD, who might be listening and thinking, why would you want that? This is awful for my life. That OCD is a condition where something in your brain is not working the way it ought to, but that doesn't mean that. So ritual, when it works, might be drawing on something similar in your brain, but when that part is working.
Yeah, whether or not it works is really, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jay, but it sounded like you were saying, okay, there's this definition that's broad that's like ritual is trying to do things that help you gain some control over your life. Whether or not you actually do might depend on how accurate your worldview is.
It's repeated action for a purpose is the broad definition. And that's why when you brush your teeth, it is actually a ritual in that definition. You're brushing your teeth for a purpose. It's for clean teeth. But when we're talking about a spiritual context for it, then we're looking at what Brandon was talking about, more of a spiritual benefit. What I'm putting in this ritual, but what am I getting out of it? And the next question that automatically comes in, first of all, does it actually work? Second of all, in what realm does it work? For there's people that gather in buildings that believe that if they perform this ritual that they're going to get rain, or they're going to get some kind of a salvation from a transcendent world. I mean, we use the pragmatic thing of does it work? That's pragmatism. It's right if it works. But as spiritual naturalists, we take that a step further and say that no, we have to follow the science. We have to follow where the evidence leads us. So I would say that for a spiritual naturalist, ritual that works is an evidence-based approach that actually does some benefit in your life, whether it's calming your mind, helping you de-stress, or a number of other benefits, and these benefits can be measured, and they have been, by positive psychology.
Yeah, I think that I totally agree. Cool.
So how did that, what Jay was just describing, those benefits, how did that work out in your story, Daniel, that I just interrupted?
What story was that?
You were talking about going to the temple.
Oh, right. And so I think whether or not it works really depends on a lot of specific factors. Like, when I'm going to give you an example of some things that I've done since that do work for me. I attend a Buddhist temple regularly, and when I enter the room, I do what a lot of people do. I bow. And you're going into this room here where you're going to do meditation and stuff like that, so you don't want to be bringing in your laundry list of stuff that you have going on in your life, your concerns. You don't want to be checking your phone. Here's another thing I do. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. But okay, so I come in and I bow. And this physical act of bowing goes along with, this is the really important part, an internal act of clearing my mind, centering myself, focusing on the present moment, and just imagining that I'm leaving everything else behind the door and directing my attention to what I'm there for. And that bowing, that physical act, somehow makes it more real to my mind, rather than if you just walked in and you just kind of thought about it without doing anything physical. It wouldn't tell your mind that some event has occurred that is significant. So for me, that bowing is more effective than if I had not bowed for that one purpose.
Yeah, it was an interesting, as I was researching for this, scientificamerica.com has an article that says why rituals work. And one of the things they said in the article is that rituals can have a causal impact on people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And you just described exactly that. That bowing, that moment of reverence, that moment of separating from everything going on in your life to come back to the present moment, that bowing triggers your thoughts and your feelings to come back to now.
Mm-hmm.
You're creating a moment, and you're creating an atmosphere. Like, it wasn't just me doing that one thing. It was everybody doing it, and everybody doing a whole bunch of other things, to where the first time I visited a Buddhist temple and then I left there, I felt rejuvenated. I felt relaxed, and I felt the presence of, the love and kindness of everyone. And all of that is kind of helped along by these activities. I'll give you another example, something that the Scientific American article you mentioned reminded me of. A friend of my wife's is a Catholic, and he does this thing that I think a lot of Catholics do. He was riding with her in the car one time, and an ambulance passed by, so he crossed himself. Very common Catholic ritual. And Julie and I were talking about that sometime after, and since then I've always thought about that. And at some point after I started realizing a naturalistic purpose for ritual, I decided to start. I don't cross myself because that's not my tradition or whatever, but if I see an ambulance, this is real helpful, by the way, in relieving the stress of a traffic jam sometimes, but when I see an ambulance or a wreck or something like that, I stop, and because I meditate, I kind of relate it back to that. I stop, I take a breath, I go, and then as I release, I focus my attention on whoever may be hurt or harmed inside the ambulance, and I wish
Daniel,
them. Yes.
Can I stop you there? Can you go back about 5 seconds there, because there was a really noisy machine that started up. I don't know.
Yeah, if anybody didn't hear, what I was saying is I stop, I go back, and I take a deep breath and I focus on that moment on the person in the ambulance or whoever may be hurt or harmed, and I kind of project to them good thoughts and good intentions. Now, as a naturalist, I don't believe that some kind of psychic ray comes out of my head and helps them materially, but what that does is it makes me a better person because it reminds me that there's something important going on here, and it's much more important than the delay that I'm getting in traffic, and it helps to form my character. And that in having that character, having a more compassionate character, will in the end, of course, be more helpful to the world and everyone else. But that's an example of another ritual that I believe is having a formulative process.
What about you, Lee? Do you have anything like this at all that you do in your life? And is there anything that you get out of it if you do?
Kind of, since I live by myself and don't really join groups that much, to me, a ritual is trying to get myself into a certain state of mind, as opposed to like meditation where you're trying to clear your mind and everything. When I do a ritual with purpose and with meaning, it is to get myself into a specific state of mind. And as a naturalist, a lot of my rituals involve like just going outside and, like you said, stopping to just take in what's going on, in the natural world and everything.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. So sometimes, for some people, depending really on where your mind is, even the experience of having a cup of coffee in the morning can be a ritual.
Yeah.
Most of the time, for most people, it's not the kind we're talking about. It's that other kind, the habit kind.
Right.
But if you use it in that way that you're talking about, Lay, if you use that in a way to bring yourself intentionally to a certain state of mind, then yeah, sure.
Yeah, if you just come in and you do some ritual, you ring a bell or you do a thing, and you're not with it, you're not in that moment experiencing that thing that ritual is about, then I don't think the efficacy will be there.
Mm-hmm.
It actually, I think sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. It depends a lot on your state of consciousness when you're doing the ritual. Because, having a long history in Christianity, I know that a lot of the ritual that we did was just, as Brandon said, just habit. It's something you just do. But then there's moments where that habit becomes ingrained, and all of a sudden you'll come in one time and you'll have that expansion of consciousness, which is what I believe spirituality deals with, the expansion and deepening of consciousness. And then the ritual becomes a spiritual ritual, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that, Jay, what you were just describing there about how, so going through even what are clearly what anybody would label rituals in a religious sense, like church or something, can be just plain habit. It reminds me of a funny story. I lived in Japan for 5 years, and so I frequented Buddhist temples, Shinto temples often, and my Japanese friends would often tell me they had stories of times like when they were at a funeral and the Buddhist monk was like chanting this super long chant, and you'd think he has to be so focused. And they'd tell me, oh, this one time the monk fell asleep in the middle of the chant.
That's really interesting because it highlights that the people that lead spiritual communities that go through this every day, maybe they're performing this service hoping that the people there will be affected by and transformed in the ritual, but maybe they're doing way more than they need to do for themselves as the service. So maybe it's not... maybe it's somewhat excusable that they might be going through the motions for the sake of everybody else.
Well, yeah, I think to some extent there's a professionalism, a level of professional you're performing a service at a certain point, and so yeah, you're leading a ritual, and it's not necessarily about what you are getting out of it. It's about what the audience gets out of it. So to some extent, yes. But I'm really just using that as a fun example of how it could show that even something like that can become just habit for people at very high echelons in a religious, path.
How do you avoid that, though?
Well, I don't know. I think you have to. I don't know.
Lee?
I'm not a monk.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's true in almost anything. Even, the rituals that you start out with a purpose for can become a habit, at some points. You have to keep refocusing on what you're doing.
In a way, that's kind of one of the purposes of a spiritual practice, is to help us stay mindful of the things that are so repetitive or so constant that we take them for granted. And so, in a way, the ritual becomes a microcosm of that very challenge.
How to bring mindfulness into it. And I think being aware that you can do ritual without being mindful of it is the first step to realizing when you're just going through the motions, and when you're, because I'm sure all of you experience, there's times you sit down and you meditate and there's no nothing. You're just sitting there and waiting for the clock to, for the bell to ring, or the gong to go off, so you can stop doing it. And I don't think it's something that necessarily you can necessarily cause yourself to be mindful. I think it's something that happens naturally when you relax and you try to pay attention to what's going on. And sometimes something happens and sometimes it doesn't. And I think of, Zen Master Dogen, who basically said Zazen was enlightenment. Doing it is the enlightenment, and trying to be mindful. And if you don't get that mindfulness, is then the ritual a failure? See, it's one of those criteria things. If you're doing an activity for a purpose, and if it's a spiritual activity for the purpose of expanding and deepening your awareness, then that in itself sets you up for those opportunities, but it doesn't necessarily bring them. It's not a cause and effect kind of thing.
Sure.
There's certainly also some very extreme experiences that people can have in the course of a spiritual practice or a ritual that relate to a profound effect on their emotional experience and their cognitive experience, epiphanies and insights. These are certainly things that you can't force. They have the right kind of cocktail of things has to arise.
I guess what I'm saying is I don't like the idea of habits bad, ritual good, because sometimes you have to do the habit long enough that it turns into something spiritual. People who are just beginning to meditate, the first experience they have is their mind is completely out of control.
Sure.
And a lot of them just give up because that's not the advertising. The advertisement is you sit down, you meditate, you're going to find bliss and happiness, and all your problems are going to go away. And that's just simply not the case. In fact, you sit down, you meditate, guess what? The problem's front and center. It's a complete opposite experience of what it's advertised as. And I think people have to understand that, habit's not bad if the habit is for the purpose of producing something good in your life. And I think
I think
that's great. Yeah.
I think what you're touching on there too, Jay, is something that BT brought up early on, which is the difference between practice and ritual. And I think one of those differences certainly what you just said applies to both. But when I think about meditation, in my kind of little way of filing things in my head, I tend to think of meditation as a practice, and maybe ringing the bell before the meditation is a ritual. And the distinction for me is maybe in terms of symbolism. Like in meditation, you're doing this technique, and the important thing is to build the habit. So, like, build the habit to go to the gym, and then eventually you'll start getting healthier, and that sort of thing. And in ritual, you've got, I think, one of the distinguishing things, if you were going to, it's maybe not that important to distinguish between where ritual ends and practice begins, but if you were, I think one indication might have something to do with the idea of symbolism, or it's not really the word I'm looking for, but as we know, art and iconography and symbolic representations of other ideals are often, even myth and story, are often included in our rituals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's usually linked to a meaningful context, a wider meaningful context that is that informs every aspect of one's life when you're living within that context. So for a Christian, that context would be the whole symbolism of Christ and the Bible and so on. For a Buddhist, it would have to do with enlightenment, the Bodhisattva path, or whichever. For a pagan like myself, it would have much more to do with nature and mythologies from pre-Christian Europe mainly, and all of those symbols kind of link together in a sort of meaningful web. And what happens in ritual very typically is you get a highly condensed set of symbols flooding into your senses that trigger all these buttons in your brain that bring up associations to put you into that mindset that feels like you're at the center of that cosmos of meaning.
And then that leads us to because that's said perfectly, that leads us into the next question, which is ritual that works. Okay, there's people that believe their ritual will actually bring rain, for an example. To them, ritual works. So we have to, I think, distinguish between changing our own mental state, our own awareness, and changing the outside physical world.
Right.
Because if we go from a scientific standpoint, rain dances don't cause rain. They do make us feel better. They make us feel like we have some control over the uncontrollable. So rituals that work, are all rituals equal? Are all rituals equally valid? So the question of validity comes into my mind when I was a Catholic, I would go and I would believe that the bread and the wine would turn into the blood and the body of Christ. Although I had more of a real presence understanding of it, that's still a belief that they have, transubstantiation, which is scientifically impossible. But they still, when you did that, you felt a communion, a union with something greater than yourself. So is that valid or invalid?
Jay, that reminds me of another situation, the same question. I heard on the radio one time on a religious program an older woman call in, and she talked about how all her life she had prayed at her bedside each night, and she prays for all these different people and prays for people that are in need and people suffering and this sort of thing, and prays for their well-being, and it was all very compassionate sorts of thoughts. And I thought to myself, I thought, even though I don't share her beliefs about what's happening there when she prays, I can't imagine too much in the standard atheist's life that would equate to that in terms of self-conditioning to focus on the needs of others, and in terms of, imagine what that has done to her to her responses and her thoughts and her attention. by focusing on the needs of others every night like that.
Right. It's psychologically
exactly.
effective, but not necessarily physically effective.
Right. Psychologically effective in bringing about a kind of virtue.
A kindness,
Yeah,
compassion.
Mm.
Similar to what Buddhists practice with meditation, the loving kindness meditation.
Yes.
Certainly.
Yeah.
So they say that ritual is the glue that holds social groups together. So my question is, how does ritual hold the Spiritual Naturalist Society together?
Well, actually one of the things I was going to mention on the show here today was how we recently started again to have our little bell and invocation at the beginning of our planning meetings. The general public doesn't see this all the time, but for the volunteers here at the Spiritual Naturalist Society, we decided to start doing that at the beginning of we have Skype meetings where everybody gets together and we discuss the logistical things going on inside the society and running the organization. And before we start, we sound a chime and everybody kind of centers and focuses, and then we have an invocation where we say the types of ideals that we're doing this for, and it helps to remind us of why we're doing this and what the society is all about and how we're trying to help people. And it's a nice thing, and it also, I think, it does help us to feel a little more unity in our purpose and our cause.
And be more mindful. And be more mindful. It's bringing that mindfulness into everything. And you talked also about possibly doing a winter solstice thing. You want to mention that maybe? Because that's a ritual that is for the larger community. That's for everybody to join in.
Yeah, today's technologies have opened up new kinds of avenues for new kinds of communal rituals. And last year we did a thing where we got on Facebook and on our in our newsletter and our mailings, and we asked people to send in a picture of a candle and their well wishes for others for the winter solstice and for the new year. And we got a lot of really wonderful, touching messages and a lot of pictures in of people's candles that they lit, different little settings and things. We've mentioned in previous episodes how some of us have altars and things like that too. And that was really wonderful. We got a lot more response out of it than I realized we would. And we posted all of those, and we had everyone's messages there. And it was kind of a nice little, you could call it a ritual in a way, a digital ritual, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it's a digital.
And it's kind of important because, the society is spread out over the whole world, really. And so we use technology to help bring us together. We're a virtual community, but also there's clumps here and there of physical communities. So, yeah, that's something that maybe something similar to that we're planning or thinking about for the next winter solstice.
Yeah, I thought it was a great idea. And that's the hard thing about being, international online community is how to bring those rituals together, not just through the obvious thing of teaching, but actually something that we can do. Because, it's happiness through compassion, reason, and practice. So how do we get a communal practice is kind of it's a hard thing to do, and I think many organizations struggle with that because we think practice, at least communal practice, we think in community, and we think community as something that's local, but the internet has expanded that definition to include literally the whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you can have romantic relationships taking place purely online for people far away, so I'm sure we can figure out how to have spiritual communal relationships as well.
Yeah.
I have a question for you guys. So we're talking about ritual that works, and with that question so far we've mainly focused on like what what do you get out of it, and how do you make it such that you can get something out of it? Or but how about like a slightly different take on it? What kind of steps can a person take to improve their ritual technique, perhaps?
Good question.
And I've got a few thoughts on that, but I'd like to get your thoughts first.
What do you think, Lee?
You know what? Again, since I am usually solitary when I'm doing rituals, I'd really like to hear from the rest of you what you do have as ideas to improve it.
Do you want to go first, Jay, or you want me to?
Go ahead, Daniel. I'll let you tackle that one.
Okay. Well, before I had mentioned something about how if ritual doesn't connect in your own mind, I think of this as a process. It's kind of like a chain, and all the links of the chain have to be there. So the first part of the chain is, what am I trying to accomplish in my spiritual practice? What do I want to improve about myself or grow within myself? Where do I want, what kind of challenges am I facing? And then the next link in the chain is, what are the things that I want to start building internally as new ways of thinking, new ways of viewing things, new habits, new activities? And then what kind of symbolic practices or rituals can I employ that will help keep my mind on that and help create kind of a repetitive thing that will help to build that, sort of make that thing come true about what I'm trying to do with my practice. And so, for example, I was trying to improve my diet, and we talked about this, I think, in a previous episode. I went outside and I found a stone, and this stone was a little bitty stone that I would carry in my hand, because one of the problems I was having, it wasn't temptation. It wasn't like, oh, I really want that donut, but I can't resist it, so I'm going to eat the donut. I didn't really have a problem avoiding temptation. What I had a problem with was just mindlessness. Like, I would eat the donut, and I went, oh no, I ate the donut. You know, it was like
right.
Somebody went on autopilot, and somebody shut the captain out of the cockpit while the donut was eaten, and then the captain came back in and said, what have you done? So this stone, basically, I said, okay, I'm going to hold this in my hand all day long. I will not release it from my hand. And it was small enough to where I could do everything I needed to do while it was still in my hand. But what it did was it kept me constantly aware. So somebody brings in a brownie. I'm like, oh, no, I got my stone here. It kept it, what that stone meant to me, the symbolism of what that stone meant to me was crucial. So all of those things. So as you build your ritual, you want to say, what symbols have meaning to me? What stories have meaning to me? What iconography? What characters? What, things like this. And then from that, you can build your ritual.
I like that.
I guess I kind of go at it a different perspective. And that's probably because of my desire to try to be evidence-based, is to basically take a ritual, make sure that it is a naturalistic ritual, and then experiment with it. And do the ritual for at least 2 months, because they say 21 days to form a habit. And then at the end of 2 months, do an evaluation. Did the ritual accomplish what I wanted it to do? For me, the difficulty that I have is there's so many rituals that are out there, and they're all connected to worldviews. They're all connected to some kind of, whether it's Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, paganism. In our society, we're kind of, there's a subjective, aware of, but Christianity pervades Western society, because that was the dominant religion for years and years and years. So many of the religious naturalists that I interact with have a bias either against or for Christianity, but it's like Christianity is the center focus of much religious naturalism. And so what I look at is I look at the fact that when you take a ritual and you take it from a particular worldview and culture, you're separating yourself from all the connections that made that relevant.
Yeah.
And as Daniel was talking about and Brandon was talking about earlier, there's connections there. And you're severing those connections that actually might not work, even though within that particular worldview it would. It would have some kind of psychological effect. So how do we, as spiritual naturalists, or myself, I consider myself a Buddhist naturalist, I have a worldview in which I can do that, and that's why I have focused more on the Buddhist construct, because I can, first of all, come to it with critical analysis and say what is and isn't naturalistic about Buddhism, and I can take those elements and I can borrow those elements without doing too much damage. But when you take a big umbrella approach, and I'll take, this practice from paganism, this practice from Christianity, this practice from Buddhism, this practice from Stoicism, then I end up separating that from the connections that they have, and I have to form new ones. And I think that's the evolution of spiritual naturalism. We need to make new connections, and so that they have a meaningful net. And that's I don't think we're there yet. So I think you have to take a practice that's within a system that you understand, so you can get those connections. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the tradition itself, sometimes the connections within a tradition itself, though, may be the problem. Like the fact that, you have these, when we say connections, there's two levels of this. There's the connections in terms of the broader social level, like everybody agrees that this symbol means this, and that ritual means this, and that's what this is about, and that's the tradition, that's the large scale cultural trappings of all that in what it means. So there's connections there, but you also have connections in your own mind, and those connections arise out of your own personal life experience. Now, if your life experience is in a completely Christian country or a completely Buddhist country, then there's going to be a huge amount of consistency between the cultural connections of those symbols and actions and your own personal neural connections of those symbols and actions. But if you, as you start to read more and learn more about other cultures and everything, that starts to diversify, and before you know it, you kind of have this separate set of associations or triggers, as BT said earlier, that maybe they correspond to this or that tradition, but maybe they're also particular to some event that happened to you in your life. And so whether or not it works might be more relevant to your own personal,
definitely
construction. And you're absolutely right. We're not there yet, because spiritual nationalism is kind of this new emerging thing. So all these connections are forming with each program we do, and each conversation that spiritual naturalists have with one another, and each article and each book, and all these things are building up the tradition, building up the ideas, and forming new connections.
It's cross-fertilization.
Well, in some ways, though, for many spiritual naturalists who are not just spiritual naturalists full stop, but who are, say, secular Buddhists or humanistic Jews or so on, they do have a full symbol system and tradition to work from. Of course, yes, there's still other things. Introducing naturalism in some cases will cause certain kinks that need to be worked out. But there is that situation, too, where there is a full symbol set, a meaningful machine to tap into.
I would even say that that's probably more likely than not. I think most spiritual naturalists come from a tradition, so they bring
Exactly.
that tradition. However, there's a growing number of what researchers are calling the nuns, which would center in more the humanistic, secular. Christianity is literally dying, and there's less and less people identifying with Christianity, at least in the United States, and definitely in Europe. And so you have this situation where there's going to be more and more people who might actually, their first spiritual adventure might be in spiritual naturalism, because it's something that based on the fact that the supernatural is unproven. There's been no evidence, and we've searched and searched. I mean, the number of people that were religious, you'd think they would have come up with some kind of firm evidence that there's some kind of a supernatural being, and they haven't. So they're coming at it saying, well, we know the natural world is real. We live in it. We interact with it. Now, how do I bring that to give meaning to my life and purpose to my life? Now they enter spiritual naturalism, and they're told they have to go back into the traditions and learn the whole traditions. I'm not sure that that's plausible or practical for many people. So what I'm saying is to take the traditions and pull out the traditions, the rituals that actually do work, and find the connections that ritual would have within a naturalistic setting. Buddhism's probably one of the easier ones, Stoicism and Buddhism, because it's already slightly secularized. You've got, of course, rebirth and karma, but you start separating that, you get into secular Buddhism. You're already on the natural path. You made a step. For example, meditation now is pretty much secularized within the mindfulness-based stress reduction and mindfulness-based therapies. So it's already in the process of secularization. But there's, for an example, since Brandon's very familiar with paganism, pagans have to be able to do that. How can we bring it? And for pagans, nature is the obvious choice. Bring it back to nature. Separate the myths. For an example, Wicca has a practice that I think is really neat, and it's called hand fasting. And that's their wedding ceremony. And one of the things they say during the wedding ceremony is that this hand fasting shall last for as long as love shall last. I think it's unrealistic in our society to say that till death do you part. That might be an ideal, but that's not the reality of 50% of the marriages. For as long as love shall last, then they'll focus, instead of enduring it, on making sure that love lasts. The focus is back on a very natural thing, which is love, and continuing to grow that flower of love, and that would make the marriage last, not a commitment that you just have to endure. And so that's the challenge for spiritual naturalists within their own tradition, to bring forth those teachings and those rituals that connect within that group, and be able to strip it of the things that are supernatural, that are unproven, that don't work in the real world, and be able to have a bouquet of flowers from all the traditions, and be able to have a regular feast of traditions that will help you in accomplishing, whether it's compassion, loving kindness, deepening your relationship with family, deepening your relationship with your spouse, dealing with your kids. All rituals can help in all these different areas, and in order to do that, they have to be divorced from the things that a naturalist would say no. And that I think is in process. Buddhism has an advanced is advanced in that particular area because of the mindfulness-based stress reduction and secular Buddhism and stuff. But I know Brandon, for an example, is in the process of doing that, and he's written many things to help do that. But there's much more creativity and much more interaction needs to be done within the larger community of the different traditions that are secularizing their particular tradition. And so to me, it's a work in progress, but I think we're making steps in that direction.
Yeah, well said. So I'm in suspense now because at the beginning of this part of our conversation, BT mentioned that he had ideas from himself about building ritual.
Yeah, building ritual and improving ritual technique.
Mm.
Yeah, well, you guys have hit on a lot of the things that I was going to say, so I'm not going to really recapitulate those, but I'll just give two. The first one is really nuts and boltsy, but also really important. And that is to have a clearly defined start and end point to your ritual. Now, when we're talking about like rituals proper, like you see in religion, where there's all the bells and whistles, having a signal to everyone, all the participants of it, that's like a precise symbol, like the ring of a bell, really can get everybody. It's like everybody starting off on the right foot, and then at the end also having a precisely defined moment when it ends. And the reason why that's so important, other than just sort of, I guess, just getting everybody in sync, is, like I was saying at the beginning of this episode, part of the function of ritual, to me at least, is to set apart space and time, to have a special moment. And you kind of, having a defined start and end point bookends it in a nice way, and that communicates that to something deep in your subconscious. And there's the elaborate ritual version, but even the person that we mentioned before who's just, their ritual is having a cup of coffee in the morning, and that's their special mind space, it applies equally well in that situation, because you pour yourself your cup of coffee, you go out on your veranda or whatever, and when you sit down and you have that first sip, then you're committing yourself. I'm not going to be checking Facebook on my phone. I'm not going to be writing down my recipes or something. No, I'm sitting here, I'm watching the leaves in front of me, and I'm enjoying this cup of coffee, and I'm having a moment where my mind can just sort of be at peace for the space of this cup, and then when it's done, then it's done. And when you're trying to communicate something to your subconscious mind, which is what ritual is really about, those sorts of very basic sensory signals are super important. Yeah. So that's the first thing that I would say, is have a defined start and end point. And the other one, you guys did kind of touch on it, but I want to just highlight it, is somebody who's listening to this might think, okay, great, this sounds wonderful. I'm going to go and I'm going to design a ritual that's going to be just awesome for me, right? And what I want to say is, don't design, let it evolve. Because an experience that's happened to me, it's happened to a lot of my friends, is what you'll do is you'll think, okay, what symbols do I want to put in it? What kind of, do I want to have chanting? Do I have this? What sequence should I do in it? And you kind of research it, and you get it all like set, and you do it once or twice or three times, and then you forget about it. You just don't come back to it. Doesn't even move you. Why? Because you have used your conscious mind to design that in a rational way, but it's not for your conscious mind or your rational mind. It's for your whole mind. And so if you kind of just start with the things that kind of call to you and let it kind of evolve a little bit from time as it goes on, like bring in this, bring in that, the parts that feel good, it'll kind of fall into a sort of pattern that feels right to you, and kind of evolve into something that becomes moving and meaningful, and which can continue to function the way it's supposed to. And the things feel right to you because they feel right to your subconscious mind. So and that's really important.
When you're saying that, so really keep it simple.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we do elaborate ritual, and we get stuck in that. Keep it simple. Be open to change. and start small. I think sometimes we want to conquer the entire world in one ritual, and that's simply unrealistic. No, I mean, I thought meditation was going to be something I could just sit down and do, and boom, it would be easy. It's anything but easy. It's something that does require discipline. It does require keeping it simple. Don't get into all the different techniques. Just learn to do the simple stuff, and then, like you said, let it evolve, let it change. We have an idea that ritual has to follow rules.
Mm-hmm.
And like you're saying, speaking to our subconscious requires us to be open to change, open to the evolution of the ritual. And that's, I think, hard. That's hard, because we've got this idea, ritual, you come to church, you do the holy water, you bow, you sit down, you stand, sit, stand, kneel, and it's all set out for you, and you have to do it this way. And because that's our pattern, that's what we've been taught, I think a lot of people come to simple rituals, and they make it very complicated, because you have to first close your eyes, you have to first sit in this particular position, yet you have all these lists of things you have to do. And I think we overcomplicate it, and then we give up.
Same thing happens in meditation too. I see a lot of people get very hung up on what kind of little, circular form am I supposed to do with my fingers and my wrist turned outward, and then I got to make sure I can get both of my ankles up there into that, and they think it's just this one particular, they got to kind of perfect this thing that they're working on that's not really what it's about, and get carried away with particulars or strict rules. I think that, and this reminds me of kind of two cautionary things that I want to bring up about ritual. We talk about designing our ritual, and building our ritual and all that, but I would like to stress something that Jay touched on earlier too, which is you've got, now today we have access to thousands of different traditions from all over the world that go back thousands of years. That's a lot of experience and a lot of shared experience, a lot of lessons learned over many years from many different kinds of people. So I would say that it requires a little bit of something that's hard for skeptics, which is trust. You have to be willing to investigate traditions and do it respectfully. Respect the tradition as you go in there. And that may sound very odd to a supernaturalist if they're listening and hearing us say this, because to them, us not acknowledging the supernatural aspects is a form of disrespect, which we don't mean. But respecting the wisdom and experience of all these people, give it a shot, give it a real shot, try these things out, kind of suspend all of, you don't want to be gullible or get into anything harmful, of course, but let yourself just, kind of cease for a minute the examination mind as you go into certain rituals, and just try it out, see how it goes, give it a real shot over time. Don't be too quick to start dismissing certain aspects of a tradition or a practice because they don't seem to make sense to you at the time. A lot of times it may take a long time of investigating a philosophy or a practice before you realize, oh, this thing does have more value than I realized. And maybe you were using kind of an impoverished version that you didn't need to quite strip away that much. That's one cautionary thing. And then the second one...
That's a really good point. And the way I make that point in the course that we have available on the website is dive deep, letting naturalism be your lifeguard. So basically, trust that you're a naturalist, and when you start getting into like supernaturalist waters or whatever, your rational bells are gonna ding. Just go ahead, trust that there's something worthwhile in a ritual or a practice. Dive deep, and just trust that naturalism is going to pull you out when you need to.
Yeah, you're not going to dirty yourself.
Yeah.
You can survive it, and then later you can say, well, that didn't really work for me. I tried it, but this really did, and I didn't expect it to. You find these little treasures.
Although my difficulty with that advice is, as you just got done saying, there's thousands of rituals. There's no way I can do that for all the rituals. And why should I take the time to invest that kind of energy into a ritual that might not do anything? See, I think
you're going to get some kind of indication based on, a cursory. There's always the cover of the book, You're going to have something that kind of draws you to it at the beginning.
Yeah, but you're not supposed to judge a book by the cover.
That's true. But people do.
Yeah, but that doesn't make it right. My thing is I think we're throwing the burden of proof back on the skeptic, and I don't think that's where the burden of proof lies. I think the burden of proof lies with us to show that this particular ritual is worth investing that time, and we should be able to have rituals that are already devoid of all the supernatural pitfalls, because honestly, a skeptic, if he is a skeptic, will be skeptical about trying something that you're telling him may or may not work, may or may not be beneficial, may or may not have mine fields in it, may or may not blow up in their face. They may take all this time, understand the tradition, and find out that they want nothing to do with it. I think we need to come with the evidence to say that this particular, and I think the burden of proof is on us, not upon the skeptic.
Well, I mean, maybe so, but I mean, we're not really there yet, where we have like a library of officially approved practices. And even if we were there, I mean, still, if you want to check out tarot cards, all I'm saying is don't worry that you're going to accidentally brainwash yourself into thinking you can predict the future. I mean,
I understand
try it.
that. Yeah,
give
I
it
understand
some time,
that, but take tarot cards for an example. Why should I even invest in that,
If you're drawn to it, then that's enough for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because we're not there right now, we're really a society of explorers, and we're all out there exploring together. And, if I totally had nothing but a skeptical approach, I don't think I would have gotten into meditation. I didn't start off with meditation by reading scientific studies.
Yeah, but Sam Harris is very much a skeptic, and he's very much a supporter of mindfulness because the evidence is there. And what I'm saying is not that the skeptic should look into and shouldn't investigate that which they're interested in. What I'm saying is to say to the skeptic, you have to try these things and see if they work. I don't think a skeptic's going to buy that. They should do the things that we do have evidence for, like meditation and loving kindness meditation. There's evidence there.
And it all depends on how much of a, some people want to utilize the benefits of others' explorations.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine. And then other people enjoy the exploration as a part of their practice. So it could be that you're going to very easily find a lot of frontiers there that have yet to been fully.
Exactly. And those people need to do those explorations and write about those explorations, write about the things that they did. The great advantage we have now is positive psychology that actually is looking at these things in more of a scientific viewpoint. So more of this is coming out that, in fact, the skeptic is wrong to write off all ritual. The evidence, like I quoted the Scientific American, the evidence is there that rituals do work. Not all of them, but many of them. And then for the skeptic to begin to look at the evidence, because the skeptic leaves, at least not an absolute skeptic, but someone who's skeptical, leads an evidence-based life. And what I'm saying is that for those of us that are explorers, that's great. Go in it, mess around. For those that are more of a skeptical mindset, start with the things that there's evidence for, because that will give them the assurance that, in fact, it's not a waste of time.
Yeah. Yeah, and who they are and how they feel about it matters. If
Right.
they feel like that, then that's what they should do. If they don't, then they shouldn't. I mean, this is all about, all of this is about having a happy life, and happiness is a subjective experience. So
Eudaimonia.
yes, and so flourishing, and so this. So your subjective way that you think and feel about it matters in determining what we should do. So I think we're pretty close to the end of our time now. This has been a little bit longer episode. We've decided to go with a format where we're allowing the conversation to go naturally, and so that we include all the good stuff for our listeners. And so before we wrap up here, any final words anybody has? Okay, guess not.
I got in my catchphrase.
All right. Okay, well, great. Well, thank you for listening to our audience. And if you have any other questions or comments, please feel free to leave them on our website, because on our website, that's where we have our episodes as well. And we have a comment section down there for you. So thank you.
This program was sponsored by the Spiritual Naturalist Society. Learn more and become a member at spiritualnaturalistsociety.org. Our music was composed by John Clemisrude. Jay Forrest is our technical director. Please share our program and join us next time on Spiritual Naturalism Today.